Peopling videos examine how we adapt to the constantly changing pressures of modern life, so we can learn to make it easier on ourselves and each other. Hi, I'm Quinn and I'm autistic. Welcome to Autistic. Peopling videos, like this one, are about topics that are of interest to everyone, but are especially important to autistic people seeking to understand how best to live our lives in an often confusing world. How does our thinking get stuck in a rut? Even the most open-minded of us are guilty of rigid thinking from time to time. Habits are a kind of rigid thinking. If you go to bed at the same time every night and have the same morning brew every day when you get up, you're being rigid, or being rigid with a small r. If your work routine changes, you'll eventually alter your bedtime, and there's every chance you could update your morning cuppa if a new or more attractive product catches your eye. I'm talking about rigid thinking with a big R, the kind that causes arguments. None of us who use the internet can have failed to notice that there's a lot of that kind of rigid thinking around these days. Scroll down your feed on this platform and it won't take long to find videos on topics that prick your conscience or inflame your ire by reaching down to your most visceral feelings and giving them a squeeze. They arouse your sympathy and your agreement whilst also stoking your anger and disapproval. It works so well because biased thinking is hardwired into us. It's a vital survival tool. Our cognitive empathy, our theory of mind, couldn't function at a useful speed if we didn't have a huge arsenal of assumptions to fall back on. Our biases allow us to make quick decisions when they count. We can also fine-tune them and rewrite them when we have to, when we have more information at our disposal, because biases are supposed to be fluid. Even the strength of our prejudices ebbs and flows with our moods and the prevailing winds of society. It's no coincidence that in hard times, people are far more willing to act on their prejudices if it allows them to identify with a tribe that offers safety in numbers. Our ability as a species to form civilizations that shape the world around us couldn't exist if we weren't capable of challenging and reaching past our preconceptions. The benefit of bias is in reducing the time it takes to make decisions, but if we don't allow it to evolve as we're exposed to new data, we'll make increasingly bad decisions. The world moves on, meaning new strategies are needed, but if we haven't moved with it, our old strategies will let us down more and more each day. Truly rigid thinking, with a big R, occurs when we close off our minds to new information and dig our heels in to preserve our existing bias. There's a number of mechanisms on a personal and a societal level which contribute to this, but there's two in particular I'd like to talk about today. Confirmation bias can be seen all around us. The way news coverage has changed in recent years offers up a good example of confirmation bias in action. We now live in an age where many news channels no longer seek to serve us with absolute facts. They feed us a diet of information and analysis tailored to appeal to and entrench existing attitudes. Whether we see ourselves as leaning to the right or the left, traditionalist or reformer, authoritarian or freedom-loving patriot, there's a news channel, a website, and probably an opaquely financed non-government lobby group thinly disguised as a think tank banging the same drum too. All parties gain from the arrangement, whether it be by influencing government, selling advertising or products, or simply the secure feeling of being amongst like-minded people. The thing is, the tricks they play on us to keep us in our lanes are only grander scale versions of the tricks we play on ourselves. They're just easier to see when it's somebody else doing them. Many news and current affairs channels actively censor their content, even those which shout the loudest about freedom of speech. They bring us wall-to-wall coverage of the stories they want us most engaged with, and barely mention those they'd rather we weren't talking about. What they do tell us sticks to a simple, easy to understand yet malleable agenda. They know their audience well enough that they can often predict likely swings in opinion and can plan to counter or capitalise on them depending on which course seems more profitable. Whilst their presenters, panellists and guests frequently appear to have differences of opinion, they never disagree on the core principles of their argument, only the finer details. Their illusion of balance is no more than carefully stage-managed theatre. They curate a 24-hour rolling feed of polarisation, opinion and edited highlights which they pass off as news. But it's us who make the choice to consume it. We freely choose to read stories, listen to podcasts and watch videos that are sympathetic to our existing biases. By choosing to favour content that agrees with us over that which challenges us, we're as guilty of censorship as the news channels we subscribe to. On our quest for a quiet life, we seek out harmony and consensus, and that leads us to like-minded people. The closer their mindset to ours, and the more of them there are, the harder we reinforce the ideas that brought us together, and our common bond starts to look less like a shared interest and more like the foundations of a movement. Confirmation bias can be seen as a positive phenomenon when it's a catalyst for unity and a sense of shared purpose. The more people who agree on a specific point, the more convinced they all become that they're right, which can be a tremendous force for good if their shared goal is a constructive one. When the direction of travel is a negative one, though, say one that encourages isolationism or discrimination, the removal of freedoms or the curtailing of human rights, confirmation bias takes off its cuddly woolly jumper of utility and shared purpose and bares its teeth. Even when the evidence is stacked against them, the victims of confirmation bias stand their ground because their sheer weight of numbers allows them both individually and collectively to dismiss anything which contradicts them as being fraudulent. They can demolish the most detailed and hard evidenced arguments by pointing out the most trivial of inconsistencies in the knowledge that all their fellow believers will regard that as a win. Some even relish the opportunity of being challenged because the sense of power and control they get from the support of their community is quite the opposite of the frailty they normally feel when they step outside their bubble. This leads me to the second psychological phenomenon I want to talk about today. The sunk cost fallacy. Imagine you've bought a lottery ticket every week for the last 10 years. You've gone to the same store on the way home from work, handed over the cash, then gone home and waited in front of the TV for your numbers to come up, only to come away disappointed. Now, times are getting hard. You don't have a job to come home from and you don't have the spare cash to buy lottery tickets, but you still find yourself in that corner shop buying a ticket every week, even when it means skipping a meal. It's worth it, you tell yourself, because it's my turn soon. You feel like after 10 years of dud tickets, you're only a few weeks away from the big win you worked so hard for, and you can't afford to miss a week because that's the week your numbers will come up. In essence, the amount you've put into buying those tickets so far, financially, emotionally and aspirationally, has convinced you that you are near to making good on your investment, when in reality, your chances of winning this week are just as many millions to 1 against as they have been every week for the last decade. Governments use the sunk cost fallacy towards the end of election cycles, trying to sell voters the line that they're so close to achieving the promises they made last time, it would be a shame to waste all that progress by electing someone else. Whilst unfaithful, disgraced lovers use it to justify being given one more chance to prove that they really can commit to the relationship. The belief that those sunk costs are worth something is the fallacy, and it's a belief we retreat into all too easily. It's of particular relevance to autistic people, because we're very often creatures of routine, but it's something all of us do in our lives to varying degrees. We assign higher worth to the familiar than the unfamiliar, because we already have something invested in it. The incoming alternative has to work extra hard to prove that it justifies the risk of letting go that which we're used to. It can be something tangible like a subscription you haven't used for years but don't cancel even though you know it's very unlikely you'll ever use it again. Or intangible like a habit of doing something in a familiar fashion even though you know there's a simpler or more practical way of going about it. The sunk cost fallacy can trap us in damaging situations or relationships. The investments of the past cloud our view of the decay or destruction of the present. We've put so much rose-tinted value into the good times of the past that we're sure it'll only take a little more effort to get past the nightmare of the present and back to the warm fuzzies of the status quo. When we finally come out the other side and realise how much time and effort we wasted on the unachievable or in resisting inevitable change, the impact can be devastating. There are two key common factors between confirmation bias and the sunk cost fallacy that made me want to talk about them together in this video. The first is they're both distortions of thought based on scale. They work because there's an element of our psyche that's more than willing to be fooled into believing that an emotional argument trumps a logical one, or that familiarity is always safest. Whilst many autistic people are more resistant to some forms of emotional duress and peer-based psychology, we can be way more susceptible in others, which I'll come back to in a later video. Confirmation bias twists our perspective, because whether intentional or not, we allow our viewpoints to be channeled in a specific direction. When we seek out consensus and avoid dissent, we've already chosen which interpretation or values we wish to pursue. We amplify the scale of agreement in our own minds to the point where some of us start to believe that any alternative opinion is either the ravings of a fantasist or evidence of nefarious intent. We see ourselves as part of that silent majority beloved of contrarians and populists alike. The sunk cost fallacy is based on past investment, but similarly relies on scale to influence our actions. We're convinced that the efforts we've made so far count for something, even if we're no closer to our goals. We fool ourselves into believing that we've been right all along and any apparent failures on our part are unrelated. They're coincidences, freak events, or sabotage, not a collapse of the strategy into which we've piled so many of our resources. There's something else these two psychological phenomena have in common though. Both confirmation bias and the sunk cost fallacy are powerful emotional arguments that blur the lines between knowledge and opinion, reason and impulse, awkward fact and convenient fiction. Because they're both based on numbers, they almost get away with the illusion of logical argument, even when the most cursory objective examination reveals them to be flawed. Confirmation bias convinces us that we're right even when we're wrong because the twisted logic of an artificially imbalanced weight of numbers wins the argument, and sunk cost fallacy does something similar based on the money, resources, time and emotional labour already potentially wasted on a fruitless course. They're important because they're both tools that we're not only exposed to by forces that don't always have our best interests at heart, but they're also tricks we play on ourselves to preserve the status quo and avoid making difficult decisions. They boost our self-esteem, make us feel safe, make us feel powerful, but they are feelings based on falsehood. However convincing a lie may be, however comforting and convenient it might be, it is still a lie. And convincing ourselves to believe it never ends well. I'm Quinn, and this has been Peopling. Thank you for watching. Identifying the issues that cause us pain or hold us back is only the start of finding a solution. If things are getting on top of you, then please don't hesitate to seek out appropriate professional help if that's an option available to you. If you've already liked and subscribed and would like to support the channel more, then please follow the Patreon links in the description to pledge what you feel is fair and affordable to help keep the lights on here and the content keep flowing.